In 1957, a quiet English town was shaken by tragedy. Two young sisters, Joanna and Jacqueline Pollock, were struck and killed in a car accident. Their parents were devastated until, a year later, they gave birth to twin girls. What happened next has haunted psychologists, spiritualists, and skeptics alike for over half a century. The twins began speaking of things they couldn't possibly know, memories, places, and people connected to the dead sisters. Was this grief taking shape, parental influence, or could it be reincarnation? This is the chilling true story of the Pollock twins. Florence and John Pollock were an ordinary couple living in Hexham, a small town nestled in the hills of Northumberland. John managed a small grocery shop and was a devout Catholic with deep spiritual leanings. Florence was quieter, more reserved, a caring mother dedicated to her home and children. Their life was modest but filled with warmth and routine. Their daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline, brought joy and energy into the household. Joanna, the elder, was known for her maturity and kindness. At just 11 years old, she often acted like a second mother to Jacqueline, helping her dress, teaching her how to read, and guiding her through the world. Teachers and neighbors described her as generous and thoughtful, with a special affection for animals. Jacqueline, on the other hand, was fiery and mischievous. She had a sense of humor beyond her years and an adventurous spirit that sometimes got her into trouble. Still, she adored Joanna and followed her everywhere. The two were rarely seen apart. One detail that would later become significant was Jacqueline's appearance. She had a distinct scar across her forehead from a bicycle accident when she was just 3, and a small round birthmark on her waist. These physical features were etched in her parents' memory, part of the unique identity they had come to cherish. May 5, 1957 began like any other Sunday. The girls, dressed in their Sunday best, set off for church accompanied by a friend. It was a bright morning, and the streets of Hexham were calm. But just as they crossed the road, tragedy struck. A car driven by a disturbed local woman swerved onto the pavement and hit all 3 children. Witnesses would later say it looked deliberate, as if the driver had aimed straight for them. The woman had recently been declared mentally unfit and had lost custody of her own children, leading many to suspect that her breakdown had fueled the attack. Joanna and Jacqueline were killed instantly, their small bodies thrown across the road. The friend, though injured, survived. News of the incident sent shockwaves through the town. The Pollocks were inconsolable. John fell into spiritual despair, questioning why God would allow such a thing to happen. Florence struggled with depression, clinging to her remaining faith. Their home, once filled with laughter and games, became a place of silence and mourning. The deaths of Joanna and Jacqueline marked the darkest chapter in the Pollocks' lives. But the strange events that followed would make their story one of the most mysterious and controversial cases in modern paranormal history. The loss of Joanna and Jacqueline shattered the Pollock family in ways few could imagine. The days following the accident felt endless, a fog of grief and disbelief that hung over the house like a permanent shadow. Florence, devastated by the deaths of her young daughters, turned inward. Her Catholic faith became her anchor, a way to cope, to believe that her children had moved on to a better place, and that one day she would see them again. But for John, faith alone wasn't enough. He had always been intrigued by the idea of reincarnation, even though it conflicted with his Catholic beliefs. In the wake of the tragedy, that quiet curiosity became something more, a lifeline. He became obsessed with the possibility that death wasn't the end, that souls could return, reborn in new bodies. And in his desperation, he began to believe that Joanna and Jacqueline would come back to him. Not metaphorically, but literally. Less than a year after the girls' deaths, Florence became pregnant again. It was unexpected and in many ways unplanned, but John didn't see it as coincidence. He saw it as destiny. As her pregnancy progressed, doctors assured the couple that there was only one fetus, but John insisted otherwise. He was certain they would have twins. Not just any twins, but his lost daughters returned to him. Florence, still deep in mourning, didn't share his conviction. She wanted to believe him, but her heart was too broken, too fragile to hope for anything that extraordinary. The idea of reincarnation felt more like fantasy than faith. Still, as the pregnancy progressed, even she began to notice things that didn't quite add up. The size of her belly, the strength of the movements. Could John be right? On October 4th, 1958, Florence gave birth. Not to one baby, but two. Identical twin girls, Jennifer and Gillian. The doctors were stunned. They hadn't seen it coming. There was no history of twins in the family, no medical explanation. But John wasn't surprised. He was vindicated. He believed with total certainty that these were his daughters, back from the dead. From the moment they were born, it was clear that something about Jennifer and Gillian was unusual. Although they were genetically identical, the twins had several physical differences. The most striking being that Jennifer had a birthmark on her waist and another just above her right eye. They were eerily similar to the ones Jacqueline had, the same shape in the same places. In fact, Jacqueline's forehead scar had left a lasting mark that John had always remembered vividly. And now, here it was again. But the physical resemblance was only the beginning. In the months to come, the Pollocks would witness a series of strange and unsettling behaviors in their daughters. Behaviors that would blur the line between coincidence and something much harder to explain. This was no ordinary case of family resemblance. Something else was happening, something that would soon draw the attention of psychologists, spiritualists, and paranormal researchers around the world. Almost from the very beginning, John Pollock became convinced he was witnessing something extraordinary, the return of his lost daughters. What started as intuition quickly grew into a deep conviction as strange coincidences began to emerge. The most immediate and startling signs were physical. Jennifer, one of the twins, had two very specific markings, a birthmark across her waist and a second mark just above her right eye. These weren't vague or generic. They closely matched Jacqueline's known injuries, one being a scar from a bicycle accident and the other a natural birthmark. To John, this was more than chance. He believed these marks were physical evidence that Jacqueline had returned in Jennifer's body. As the twins grew older, the coincidences only grew more disturbing. Around the age of 3, the girls began asking for specific toys that had belonged to Joanna and Jacqueline. These toys had been boxed up and stored in the attic, out of sight since the day of the accident. The twins had never seen them, and yet they not only described the toys in detail, but also knew their names. Even more uncanny, they insisted on ownership, correctly identifying which toys had belonged to which sister. One day, Florence overheard them arguing over a toy doll. Jennifer claimed it was hers, but Gillian quickly corrected her, saying, "No, that was Jacqueline's doll, not yours." The casual tone in which the girls spoke of the deceased sisters, as if they were speaking about their own memories, was unnerving. What troubled Florence even more was that she had never spoken openly to the girls about Joanna and Jacqueline. She had made a conscious effort to avoid bringing up the tragedy, wanting to protect the twins from grief and the haunting weight of the past. But it wasn't just the toys. The girls developed an intense, irrational fear of cars. Anytime they walked near a road or heard the sound of a car engine, they would freeze in terror or cling tightly to their mother. On more than one occasion, they began crying, saying things like, "The car is coming to get us." Florence could never explain where this fear came from. They had never witnessed an accident and had never been in one themselves. The most chilling moment came when the family returned to Hexham, the town where Joanna and Jacqueline had lived, a town the twins had never seen. As they walked through the familiar streets, Jennifer and Gillian began pointing out locations. They identified the school their sisters had attended, recognized the local playground, and even led their parents through alleyways and roads without hesitation. It was as if they had walked those streets before. Then something even more incredible happened. Jennifer pointed to a house and confidently stated, "That's where our grandparents live." She had never been there. And yet she was right. To John, there was no doubt his daughters had returned. To Florence, it was something far more complex and far more troubling. As the years passed, the twins' strange behaviors only deepened the rift between their parents. John, who had long believed in reincarnation, now saw the twins as undeniable proof. He believed with absolute conviction that Joanna and Jacqueline had come back to him, their souls reborn in the bodies of Gillian and Jennifer. Every memory, every phobia, every piece of unexplainable knowledge only strengthened his belief. He began documenting the children's statements, keeping detailed notes. He even contacted paranormal researchers and spiritualists to share the story. To him, this was a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon, a validation of something he had always believed in. In his eyes, death had not won, but Florence remained unconvinced. While she was deeply moved by the strange occurrences, she couldn't shake her concern that John's intense beliefs might be shaping the girls' behaviors, even if unintentionally. Could the children be absorbing their father's grief and repeating things he had subtly communicated? Could their memories be a result of a suggestion rather than true past life recall? She also feared what it might mean for their future. If the girls believed they were someone else, someone who had died tragically, what impact might that have on their sense of self? Then something unexpected happened. Around the age of 5, the strange memories began to fade. The girls became less vocal about the toys, the places, and the events they had once spoken of with such certainty. Their phobia of cars lessened. They stopped referring to past lives. By the time they started primary school, their behaviors became indistinguishable from any other children their age. The transformation was so gradual that it was almost imperceptible. But eventually, the memories, if that's what they were, disappeared completely. Still, the story didn't end there. As adults, both Gillian and Jennifer would look back on their early childhood with a mixture of confusion and awe. They no longer had conscious memories of being Joanna or Jacqueline, but both described an unshakable sense of connection to something or someone beyond themselves. Gillian, in particular, reported vivid dreams and visions of places she had never been. One image returned again and again in her dreams, a large house with a wraparound garden. When she described it to her parents, they recognized it immediately. It was a place Joanna had loved, a home she used to visit as a child. And when Gillian finally visited that town, she recognized it as though she'd walked its streets before. The memories may have faded, but the mystery never did. The remarkable story of the Pollock twins eventually reached beyond the borders of Hexham and even England itself. Among those intrigued was Dr. Ian Stevenson, a Canadian-born psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, who had spent much of his career documenting and studying claims of reincarnation, particularly among children. By the 1960s, he had compiled thousands of such cases from cultures around the world. But the Pollock twins were different. This was not a story from India or Southeast Asia, where belief in reincarnation is deeply embedded. This was a case from a quiet British town, from an ordinary Christian family with no cultural bias toward reincarnation. That fact alone made it extraordinary. Dr. Stevenson reached out to the Pollocks and conducted a detailed investigation. He interviewed the family at length, reviewed photographs, journals, and even medical records. What caught his attention most were the physical birthmarks on Jennifer, the scar on her forehead and the birthmark on her waist. In his other research, Stevenson had documented similar physical correspondences between children and their alleged former selves, especially when the previous person had died violently. He believed these cases, while rare, pointed towards something science had yet to fully understand. He eventually included the Pollock twins in his 1987 book, Children Who Remember Previous Lives, calling it one of the most compelling and credible Western examples he had come across. But not everyone was convinced. Critics of Stevenson's work argued that the evidence was anecdotal and unprovable. They pointed to the role of suggestion, especially in highly emotional or traumatic family environments. In the Pollock case, they questioned John's influence. A father grieving deeply, already inclined toward reincarnation, and eager to find his lost daughters in his new children. Could it be that his belief, even unconsciously, shaped how the twins behaved? Children, after all, are incredibly perceptive. They pick up emotional cues, overhear conversations, and learn far more from their parents than we often realize. Was it possible that the twins' knowledge of Joanna and Jacqueline came not from memory, but from osmosis, absorbing unspoken truths from their environment? Skeptics also pointed out the nature of memory itself. Human memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction, a fluid, malleable process easily shaped by belief, bias, and suggestion. In that light, the twins' early remarks could have been innocent childhood play, magnified by a family desperate to find meaning in their grief. Coincidence, confirmation bias, and even false memory could explain the story. But even with these rational explanations, the eerie accuracy of some of the details, the scar, the toys, the recognition of Hexam, remain difficult to explain away entirely. So the debate continues. Was it science yet to be discovered, or grief shaping reality? As the years went on, Jennifer and Gillian Pollock grew into bright, thoughtful young women. Their childhood fame faded, and the media interest waned. They moved away from Hexam, attended school, and eventually started families of their own. For the most part, they lived quiet, private lives, far removed from the extraordinary claims of their early years. Yet the echoes of that past never entirely disappeared. In adulthood, both sisters spoke publicly on rare occasions, cautiously and with respect for the mystery that once surrounded them. Neither fully embraced the idea of reincarnation, but neither rejected it outright either. They acknowledged the strange memories of their youth and the confusion that came with them. Gillian, in particular, reported still having strong feelings of déjà vu when visiting places her deceased sister Joanna had known, as if something in her soul recognized them before her eyes ever did. "I don't remember the things people say I said," she once told a local journalist, "but I do feel that there was something there, something I can't quite explain." Jennifer has spoken less often, but when she has, she's described a sense of always having been part of something that came before, as if her story didn't start at birth. Their mother, Florence, lived long enough to see her daughters grow into healthy, balanced adults. Though she remained skeptical of the reincarnation theory for most of her life, she gradually softened over time. She admitted in later interviews that some of what she witnessed in those early years defied explanation, and that perhaps the truth was not as black and white as she had once believed. John Pollock, however, never wavered. Until his death in 1985, he maintained his unwavering belief that Jennifer and Gillian were Joanna and Jacqueline returned. For him, it wasn't just a comforting idea. It was a truth he had witnessed with his own eyes. To this day, the twins, now in their 60s, remain a living mystery, walking reminders of a story that continues to perplex and fascinate. The story of the Pollock twins sits in that uneasy space between belief and skepticism, between the supernatural and the psychological. For some, it's a powerful example of how grief can shape perception, how love for the departed can reach across time in strange, unintended ways. For others, it's a rare and startling glimpse into the possibility that life may not end with death, that memory, identity, and soul might somehow continue, even if we don't yet understand how. We live in a world that seeks evidence. We build our understanding on proof, logic, and science. But every so often, a story comes along that resists all three. A story that lingers in the shadows, whispering that not everything has an answer. Were Jennifer and Gillian the reincarnations of Joanna and Jacqueline? Or were they just children growing up in the long shadow of a family tragedy, shaped by stories, soaked in sorrow, and raised in a house still haunted? We may never know, but one thing is certain: the echoes of the past can be louder than we think, and sometimes those echoes don't fade. They return in new forms, in new faces, and with new voices, whispering a truth we're not yet ready to hear. Because some stories never die, they simply begin again.